On the most recent episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, even the usually Trump sycophantic Piers Morgan was visibly fed up and called out Donald Trump and the Trump administration for their cruelty, their lack of respect for due process, and their dishonesty when it came to the unlawful deportation of Abrego Garcia, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, as you know, Piers Morgan styles himself as a nonpartisan, principled journalist, goes straight down the middle, but more often than not, far more often than not, he grades Donald Trump on a curve. He holds Donald Trump to lower standards with respect to integrity and honesty and principle than he does the Democratic Party. And if you look at his, Piers Morgan Uncensored episodes, if you look at his writings for the New York Post, his appearances on Fox News, his Twitter page, it's very obvious he grades Trump on a curve, which is as far from principled and nonpartisan as you could possibly be. But every now and then, even Piers Morgan gets fed up with the excesses of Donald Trump and the Trump administration. And so we've got a lot to talk about because there has been some updates with the Abrego Garcia case. But first, I want to show you a clip of even Piers Morgan calling out Trump and the Trump administration about all this.
The key problem with this is the lack of due process, and it's coming back to haunt the administration. Because when you get a guy like this who, according to a ruling in a court in 2019, was not supposed to be deported back to El Salvador because of the risk to his life from other gangs. We haven't heard from this. We don't know where he is in this prison. Is he alive? Is he going to stay alive? Will the gangs that were threatening him enough for a U.S. court to say he should not be deported back there, will they get to him? So I think this is an existential threat to this guy's life. And let's not pretend that Donald Trump can't pick the phone up to the president of El Salvador. Of course he can. They're paying millions of dollars to facilitate these guys being put into prison.
And the whole Supreme Court unanimously said, so let's hope that happens.
Yeah. And they said he has rights, habeas corpus rights. Yeah, human beings have rights, even illegal aliens, even alleged terrorists, even alleged gangsters. They have human rights. We don't give them human rights. They're born with them. They're innate.
Some of them.
So that was Josh Rogin from the Washington Post. He is a foreign policy writer for the Washington Post. But again, Piers Morgan seems fed up, especially with the Trump administration's excuses. The guy's in El Salvador now. We don't have any jurisdiction over El Salvador. As if Donald Trump, as Piers Morgan and others have noted, couldn't just pick up the phone and either bargain with or demand that Bukele, who is the president of El Salvador, return Abrego Garcia. So with that in mind, having established that even Piers Morgan finds this deplorable and is calling out the Trump administration for their cruelty, their lack of respect for due process, and their dishonesty with respect to apparently how they have no control, they have no ability to influence Bukele and the El Salvadoran government to return Abrego Garcia, let's look into the most recent developments. Because as Bill Maher mentioned, and we did a video about this with friend of the show, Pisco, the Supreme Court unanimously, even Alito and Thomas and Amy Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, even the 6-3 conservative supermajority, joined with the liberals to reaffirm that people who are deported out of this country, even under the Alien Enemies Act and others, have a right to due process and habeas rights in particular. That was unanimously confirmed. And they also effectively ordered the Trump administration to obey a lower court order, a district court order, saying that Abrego Garcia had to be returned. But what happened since then? Let's take a look. CNN writes about this. Abrego Garcia was mistakenly deported. In a tense hearing, the Department of Justice wouldn't say where he is. What happens next? This isn't good. Less than a day after the Supreme Court said the Trump administration had to facilitate the return of a man mistakenly deported to El Salvador, the case appeared headed for even murkier waters. During a tense hearing before U.S. District Judge Paula Zinnis on Friday afternoon, Justice Department Attorney Drew Ensign repeatedly stonewalled the judge as she sought to nail down details about the steps the administration is taking to secure the return of Armando Abrego Garcia, at one point even admitting he had no information to provide on exactly where the Maryland father of 3 currently is. Quote, "I'm not asking for state secrets," Zinnis said after Ensign told her he didn't have basic details on where Abrego Garcia is. Quote, "I'm asking a very simple question. Where is he?" Quote, "There is no evidence today as to where he is today," the judge said later. Quote, "That is extremely troubling." Zinnes on Friday ordered the Justice Department to provide daily updates on what the administration is doing to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia, but it remains unclear whether the reports would prove satisfactory to either the court or the lawyers representing Abrego Garcia and his family. The judge did not say what would happen if she didn't like the answers. Here's what to know about the case. The Trump administration has conceded that it mistakenly deported him, quote, because of an administrative error, but maintains it cannot bring him back because he is in Salvadorian custody. Abrego Garcia was granted protected status by an immigration judge in 2019 under the Trump administration that prohibited the federal government from sending him to El Salvador. His attorneys say he fled gang violence in El Salvador more than a decade ago. That is one of the things Piers Morgan referenced. Abrego Garcia had been identified by his wife in a photo of detainees entering intake at El Salvador's notorious mega prison last month. Officials with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement say he is a member of MS-13, which the Trump administration has designated as a foreign terrorist organization. Zinnes had initially ordered the administration to return Abrego Garcia to the U.S. last Friday, calling the mistaken deportation an illegal act and setting a midnight April 7th deadline. The administration quickly appealed her order, first to the federal appeals court based in Richmond, and then, when the intermediate court hadn't yet ruled, to the Supreme Court, which put the deadline on hold while it considered the case. The High Court on Thursday backed Zinnes' order, but did not give the administration a deadline for when Abrego Garcia should be returned, saying instead that the district court's judge's directive was unclear and needed clarification. Importantly, the Supreme Court noted that the clarification needed to be made with, quote, due regard for the deference owed to the executive branch in conduct of foreign affairs. Hours later, Zinnes issued a new order for the government to, quote, take all available steps to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return and directed it to provide her with a sworn statement from an individual, quote, with personal knowledge of the steps the government has taken or is planning to take to secure his return. But attorneys with the Justice Department told the judge on Friday morning that they needed more time to provide the sworn declaration, blowing past 2 deadlines she gave the department to file it. She ruled later Friday that the administration, quote, failed to comply with her order for the information, saying it, quote, made no meaningful effort to comply. So again, here we have this is like the 3rd or 4th instance of the Trump administration in less than 3 months violating a district court order. Trump says he would bring Abrego Garcia back if the Supreme Court ordered it. Trump on Friday said that he would bring back Abrego Garcia if the Supreme Court ordered him to do so. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One on the way back to Florida, Trump was asked about the case and said, quote, if the Supreme Court said bring somebody back, I would do that. I respect the Supreme Court, which is, again, for all intents and purposes, that is what the Supreme Court said. Hey, listen, this lower court told you to bring this guy back. You need to facilitate his return. This idea that, an explicit order from the Supreme Court, that is a difference without a distinction without a difference. Asked about Judge Zinnes and her order earlier Friday, Trump said, quote, well, I'm not talking about the lower court. I have great respect for the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court told you to do what the lower court did. Trump told reporters, quote, I don't know which one, appearing to concede that he was not familiar with the details of this specific case. Quote, but if they said to bring him back, I would tell them to bring him back. Trump's comments appear directly at odds with what the Justice Department attorney argued in Maryland earlier that day. During the brief hearing Friday, Zinnes, an appointee of former President Barack Obama, appeared incredulous as Innocent failed to answer her questions about the case, including their failure to meet her deadline for submitting the declaration. Quote, the record as it stands is your clients have done nothing to facilitate the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia, the judge said. She pushed back strongly on the government's argument that the Supreme Court order required her to first hear from the Justice Department before pushing ahead in the case and ordered up the daily updates to keep close tabs on how the administration was following her order. Quote, we're not going to slow walk this, Zinnes said. Quote, so you will have a full and fair opportunity to be heard, but we're not relitigating what the Supreme Court has already put to bed. The judge said the updates must come in the form of a sworn statement from an individual with personal knowledge of the situation. The individual must answer a series of questions the judge has already posed to the government, including, quote, the current physical location and custodial status of Abrego Garcia, what steps, if any, defendants have taken to facilitate Abrego Garcia's immediate return to the United States, and, quote, what additional steps the defendants will take and when to facilitate his return. Quote, I hope you will in good faith comply, she told Ensign, adding that even if the answer is that the government has no information to provide, she wants to know that every day. Quote, it's important to go on the record in a case of this nature, the judge said. The filing is due by 5 p.m. Eastern time each day. The judge hasn't said when she would stop requiring the submissions. So folks, there you have it, okay? This is, again, extremely troubling that the government is dragging its feet and that Trump is saying, of course I would obey a Supreme Court order to return him, when again, for all intents and purposes, that is what the Supreme Court has already said. They said, hey, listen, this lower court judge has told you to bring Abrego Garcia back. You need to facilitate it. How is that fundamentally different in spirit and letter than the Supreme Court saying, I'm ordering you to bring him back? It's a difference without a distinction without a difference. And the Trump administration is dragging its heels. And that might be why even Piers Morgan, of all people, is fed up with this. But we'll see what happens. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.